All right, everybody. Welcome to the Woods Hole Historical Museum's conversation, Getting History Correct, Telling Our Story from the Wampanoag Perspective by Stephen Peters. I'm Debbie Scanlon, the museum director, and we're very pleased to have Stephen, who's co-owner and creative director of SmokeSygnals and a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, here tonight to share his perspective on Thanksgiving and to help us get the local history right. Steve's mother, Paula, and grandmother, Ramona, are also well known for sharing their stories of the Wampanoag history and culture as well. We will welcome questions at the end. Please put them in chat with the icon toward in the middle of the bottom of your screen. And after Steve's talk is over, I'll read the questions and he will answer. We're recording this talk, as I said, and it will be posted on our website. So welcome, Steve, and we look forward to your talk.
Oh, thank you so much, Debbie. It's always exciting to get to share some of the work that we've done over the past now, oh gosh, 10 years or so. It was about 10 years ago when my mother first started saying, listen, we really start to need to look at the commemoration of the Mayflower crossing in the 400th and start using that as a platform to really share the history from the perspective of our tribe. And we really felt it was important that we had a voice in that history, because up until this point, we really didn't feel like we had a voice, and that the history that had been shared was inaccurate, and it was damaging as well. It was damaging because of the stereotypes that were perpetuated through those myths and inaccuracies in history that were shared. So we started to look at how we could best start to reshape that and use the history the way that we understand it. We took a look at a lot of primary source documents, the merchants, the pilgrims. They were all very careful to document some of these key interactions that they had with our tribe. And so, they had documented it. It was just history as it was told in contemporary times shows that it didn't align with necessarily the narrative that they were trying to craft. And what we often find when we're working with really any historical project is there's this constant struggle to really make history clean and concise and have these natural start and end points. And when we looked at the founding of this country, obviously, the natural starting point that continued to pop up for people was the Mayflower arrival and the Thanksgiving holiday. And obviously, we know that as Native Americans, with archaeological evidence dating us back to over 12,000 years on this very land, that history did not start when the Europeans arrived. We also know that the Europeans were coming here long before the Mayflower arrived as well. So with that, we really started to dig into the backstory. But as we take a look at the Thanksgiving holiday in itself, which, for me, I'm going to just share one part of the screen there, which I think is the Norman Rockwell Thanksgiving holiday. For the Thanksgiving holiday itself to really come alive, it had to become a product of America. And for it to become a product of America, it had to be formed at the expense of my tribe, the Wampanoag people, and Native Americans in general. And that in itself it's painful as a Native American to see the history kind of twisted and to see our culture and traditions kind of pushed aside. It makes the truth, and for it to happen, really the truth and the culture and the history of our tribe had to really kind of be killed. And that's a really painful thing for Native Americans to have to endure. And we're going to go into that a little bit more down the road as well. And I'm trying to run the Zoom as well as do the talk as well, so it's always a little bit of a challenge. But what we do know about that Thanksgiving holiday is really just from one small passage that was in Mort's relation, which simply said that 90 men, that Massasoit showed up with 90 men, and they stayed for 3 days. They played some games, and they feasted. Exactly why they arrived, how they were welcomed, did they anticipate these 90 men arriving? Probably not, but we don't know that exactly for sure. But we do know that a lot of the typical images that we see around the depiction of the Thanksgiving holiday, which I'll share one more with you here as well, which is this one here. You know, this is an image that, you know, really reinforces that that myth that the natives were in need of immediate assistance from these Europeans. Like, we were just waiting on the shores for the Europeans to come over and save us. You know, and here you see Native Americans being fed food from the Pilgrims. There's a woman, Wampanoag, up at the top, being kind of led around as if she doesn't know where to go or what to do by another Pilgrim woman. And the Pilgrims outnumber the natives as well, which we can an accurate depiction of what actually occurred based on what was left behind in Mort's relation. And so there is, thankfully, and this is a local artist as well that I love, Karen Ronaldo. And she did this depiction of the Thanksgiving feast, which is pretty much spot they're not necessarily there looking like they're in need or in disheveled. And that's pretty close to the history, the way that we understand it. So with only having this small piece of Mort's relation to go from, you know, we have to look at where else can we start to make some truth out of this holiday that was really the Civil War, to kind of give us this feel-good, you know, family event where everyone can come together and the country can come together and rally around this moment from 1621. So for us in our work, when we take a look at events like that, we really like to dig in and try and understand, well, what was happening around that time? What was happening prior to it? They can start to put those events into context. And when you start to look at what happened in the past, things start to make sense, and the events start to make sense. So when we looked at this, we said, you know, well, where do we want to start? Because we don't want to start in 1620, because we know that there was a lot going on prior to that. And we don't want to start at Thanksgiving either. And so for us, it was important to start, we felt, at 1614. And 1614 was a point in time that we decided to start the history research that we were doing, because there was a couple important things that happened at that time. One was you had the village of Patuxet, and the village of Patuxet did become Plymouth Colony. But that begs the very real question of what happened to Patuxet Village? The other thing as well that happened in 1614 is that you had a merchant who was here to actually supposed to be here to do some fair trading, Thomas Hunt, arrive on the shores of Patuxet. And instead of trading with the Wampanoag men and women, he decided to capture 27 young men, put them capture them, put them below of his ship, and bring them back to Spain, where they were sold as slaves. And one of those men that we happen to know is Tisquantum. And Tisquantum becomes known as Squanto. So we really felt it was important that people understood that Patuxet was one of 69 or so villages in the Wampanoag Nation, that it was there which became Plymouth Colony, and Tisquantum had been taken slave, which is how he learned English. You know, and that's like this part of the Thanksgiving sort of mythology as well, where, you know, these natives were kind of hanging around and already knew English. Like they had learned English waiting for the Pilgrims to arrive so that they could greet them and say hello. And there certainly were not any dual language classes that were going on here in 1620 either. They learned English because some of the men here had been taken slave. Tisquantum was one of them. He learns English because he was taken as slave. He finds his way back, but he wasn't the only one that found his way back either, because there was another one, Ipanau. And Ipanau was from the island of Nope, which is Martha's Vineyard. And Ipanau finds his way back in 1614 as well. So in Ipanau, we do know how he found his way back. We're not, we have pretty good ideas about the exact situation around Tisquantum coming back, but Ipanau, we know that in 1614, he convinces the people that have him captured that if they give him a ride back, he'll show them where all the gold is on Martha's Vineyard. So he figures out while he's there, these guys really like these golden rocks. So if I just tell them there's a ton of it on Martha's Vineyard, they'll bring me back home. And they did. They brought him back in 1614. He jumps off the side of the ship. There's fighting that goes back and forth between the Wampanoag and the Europeans, but Ipanau escapes. And so he escapes in 1614. Also, though, while Tisquantum is now a slave in Spain, there's something else that starts to occur around that time as well, and that starts in 1616. And 1616 to 1619, we have a period that we refer to as the Great Dying. And I'm going to show you an illustration that my uncle, Robert Peters, did for us for a panel. And let's see here. Let me see if I can, hopefully you can see the illustration part of this panel. And what he did is, it may be a little bit difficult to see the whole thing, but he put it into four pieces. So in 1616, at the village of Patuxet, there is a fishing ship, a French fishing ship that wrecks off of the coast. And there's accounts of one of the men coming ashore exhibiting signs of illness. He had arrived symptomatic of sickness with headaches, pockmarks, and yellowing skin, and that he died soon afterwards. Not long after that, a plague starts to rip through the Wampanoag Nation. So from 1616 to 1619, there are estimates of over 100,000 Wampanoag perishing in just a very short time. And Patuxet is ground zero for that plague. That in itself was, in going back to 1616, losing 27 men from a village would have been devastating. I know those were 27 young men that were needed to hunt for food, to work on any of the dwellings, the houses. Everybody had a role within that village, and to lose 27 of them would have been devastating. Then to come into 1616 to 1619 and lose 100,000 Wampanoag within that short period would have just crippled my ancestors and their ability to protect their land, to feed their families. And because Patuxet was ground zero for that plague, it essentially had to be abandoned. You'd have to imagine that at that point in time, they had no understanding about where the sickness was coming from, how to prevent it. They just knew that if you went to certain areas, you were more likely to get it, and you needed to avoid those places. So Patuxet, and you can see in the illustration, what my uncle tried to do was show the progression of that plague. So in the top left corner, you have the French ship in the background. You have the Patuxet Wampanoag men and women greeting those people, trying to help them out. In the next panel, you see the French fisherman dying, and he's actually being covered by a blanket which had the old French flag on it as well. I think my uncle had a lot of fun actually researching what the French money. And then you see the plague starting to rip through, and at the end of it, you see the village abandoned. And unfortunately, the way that sickness went through the community as well, we didn't even have time to properly bury the dead. Which is for any people, that's a really difficult decision to have to make, and really unfortunate as well. So at the end of the plague, we come into a period where Tisquantum is now working his way back, and we think that Tisquantum, we know that his passage back was sponsored by a guy, Sir Ferdinand of Gorges, who was doing a lot of trading between the Wampanoags and reselling items that were in need in Europe. The skins and other items and beads that they enjoyed having. However, due to the plague, as well as the fact that men had been taken slave, and now natives were extremely upset and weary of dealing with any Europeans. There had been some fighting that had gone on, specifically out towards Nauset, which is now closer towards Provincetown, where I believe it was 1618 or 1619, there was some skirmishes that had taken place between the Nausets and some traders that had come in. The Nausets took some of those traders captive and probably killed them. So relations at that point between the Europeans and the natives here were I would say at an all-time low for that period. So this guy, Sir Ferdinand of Gorges, he sponsors the passage for Tisquantum to come back with a gentleman Dermer. And we pretty sure that he did that because he realized he needed to smooth relations over. Things had gone really bad. Graves had been robbed again. Natives had been taken slave. There had been fighting and killing on both sides, and nobody was trusting anyone else. But they had now Tisquantum, who learned English, could work as an emissary, so they sponsored his passage to come back. And that in itself is really an interesting thing when you start to dive into it, because it puts Tisquantum in a really challenging spot. What's he going to do when he comes back? He had to have been aware of the plague that had ripped through the Wampanoag nations. It wasn't something that was a secret. So I'm pretty sure they probably informed him of that. He also probably knew as well that well abandoned, but he did go back there. And unfortunately, Dermer only writes one tiny little passage in his diary that says, when they arrived, all were gone. And that seems like such a cold way to describe what feelings he must have been going through to, be gone for all those years, never knowing if he was going to make it back, finally makes it back, and steps into the Patuxet village to find that everything that he had left was now gone. And so what I'd like to do on this, and a lot of the work that we do, we end up doing a lot of video content that goes along with it, because history is emotional. And we're able to portray some of that emotion through the images that we use. We're able to try and get it across a little bit in some of the art installations that we have. But the most effective way we feel like that we can get it across is through video. And so this is one video that I thought I would share with us today, which is the return of Tisquantum. So let me pull that video up here, and just bear with me while I get this up. Oh, sorry, that is the wrong video. Here we go. And see if I can get this right this time.
wanted. The skies have cleared, and there's a good wind to carry us south down the coast. My friend, mine and Tomp, you'll be home in just a few days.
I've changed in these 5 years. I'm certain that much has changed in my homeland. There may be new leaders among us, new alliances, and for certain, no one has forgotten the 27 men that were stolen from their families and villages. That is more than a ripple in the water to make smooth, Thomas.
Captain Hunt was a rogue, a scoundrel since been branded a pirate for his deeds.
My father was a great whale hunter, revered and respected by his Mushoon did not return. Each morning upon waking, my mother Nukas would go to the shore and stare at the horizon, waiting for him. I had no heart to tell her to stop hoping. Does she still now wait by the shore with a twice broken heart, waiting for a husband who will never return, and a son who she does not know is still alive?
What you have endured, Nitomp, was undeserved indeed.
Nukas depended on me to provide for her, to fish, to hunt, so long as I didn't go for whale. I would bring her deer and fish, and sometimes clay from the cliffs of Nope Island. Nukas made the finest pots of clay. They were prized by any who owned one. But still Nukas longed for an iron kettle, as only the Englishmen made. After the visit from our Nitomp, John Smith, his second ship came into the harbor and offered to trade. Captain Hunt admired our beaver skins. I asked if they could show me an iron kettle. He said yes. There were kettles, other novelties to bring ashore.
Our reputation among your people has been tarnished. But now, Sir Ferdinando Gorges has sponsored your passage home to help us, to repair that damage that has been done, to help future relations for trade and to settle among you.
Thomas, you will never know what my brothers and I endured after we were tricked and stolen away to Spain. You will never know what it is to be packed in the dark and foul belly of Hunt's ship like brined cod. I know not Gorges well, but settle among savages, Matane Tomp, he's a fool.
Agreed. I am just one man, but if you introduce me as a gentleman, I trusted Natomp.
Thomas, so many of your men have gone before you and abused our trust. Your kind is far apart from ours, and your religion takes you on a narrow path. You see darkness where we see light. To honor the earth and live in balance with the four-legged, the winged, the finned, is not savage. I have dreamed of nothing but to go home again.
This voyage will take you home, but it may not be as you remember. Mortality that in some villages scarcely any survived.
What has become of Nukas?
Pater, nucas na nok.
That's that was a really emotional piece for us to produce. But we thought it was important to try and help people put some context behind the short passages
I'm a
that we
countrywoman
have.
of
Oh,
Scrooby in
hold
Nottinghamshire.
on.
My father came to see the Church of England as corrupt.
Sorry about that. It started to play the next video in our collection there. So we thought that was important, and one of the things as well that we found interesting, and we did take a lot of creative liberty with that production because there was such a short amount, but we didn't feel like it was a far stretch to imagine what he would have been going through as he came back into that village and had to see the bones of his family, his friends, his cousins, lying there. And there are accounts, when it does become Plymouth colony in 1620, they do arrive and have to literally sweep away the bleached bones of the dead to make way for their homes. But one of the things in 1619 as well that was really interesting is that Tisquantum and Thomas Dermer run back into Ypenow. And Ypenow was familiar with Sir Ferdinando Gorges as well. And so when he learns that Thomas Dermer is there on his behalf, he wants to kill Dermer. And there's accounts that Tisquantum stood up for Thomas Dermer. He protected him. And that seems like such an odd thing that he'd make his way back and would decide to lay his allegiance with Thomas Dermer as opposed to Ypenow, and probably goes a long way to understanding why Tisquantum would have ended up living with the Pilgrims and spending his last days with them. I'm not sure that he was necessarily trusted afterwards by the other villages. So in 1620, in understanding all of that's happened at this point as well, is understanding that the Wampanoag Nation is extremely weak. They're vulnerable. They have land being approached now by the Narragansett tribe, and they have a very difficult time standing up for themselves and being able to keep their land in their territory. So in 1620, when the Mayflower arrives off the coast of Provincetown, you can understand then, now understanding all this, you can understand why it wasn't too long while they were on that coast that the Nausetts would have driven them off in what came to be known as First Encounter. They had seen enough. Not to mention, Pilgrims decided they needed some additional corn, some kettles. Decided at one point not to ransack a grave. Then they come back and they decide to start ransacking graves. So you can clearly understand why in that what is now known as First Encounter, the Nausetts would have started firing some arrows at them, and what I think is a very polite way, asked them to move on because nobody was hit with any of these arrows. And the Pilgrims make that decision knowing that the Patuxent village is empty right around the corner. So they know it's there. It's less than a day's ship ride. from Provincetown to Plymouth. They actually take a shallop one day and just go scout it out before they all move over. And they go there and they have to, again, sweep away the bones of the dead and make their way. But you have to understand that to understand why the Wampanoags and my ancestors would have allowed them to make this move, why they would have allowed them to take Patuxet Village. And they would have allowed it, I think, because they were so depleted because of the Great Dying, because of the slaves. And they needed, at that particular moment in time, some support. They needed an ally. And the Europeans had firepower. They had some technology that would have given them a leg up to stand on. I don't think that necessarily there was a clear understanding of the European style rule, and that those rules would be imposed on my ancestors. The way that they would divvy up their land, the way that they would fence their land off, the way that they would encroach on new land and acquire it. Those were things, I think, that unfortunately there was not a clear understanding on both sides on exactly what those were and how quickly those would continue to grow, and how fast the Pilgrim settlement would grow as well, and their need for additional land. But nevertheless, then that brings us back to the Thanksgiving holiday, the way that we understand it through history. You can start to then understand why the Wampanoags may have shown up on the door with 90 men, possibly not invited, most likely to show that they still had some force, that yes, they needed support, but they also needed to show that if things got out of line, they could very quickly get them off the land and remove them. So that's us putting the Thanksgiving holiday into context from what is a very short passage in Mort's relation about Massasoit showing up for 3 days with 90 men. I hope you guys enjoyed that. One of the things that we really hope is that we spark people's interest to go out and try and learn more about the history, because it's impossible to fit all of this into one exhibit, one series of movies, one talk. But hopefully it's given enough to put things into context. And generally as well, I'd like to think that when you do that, things just make more sense. It makes far more sense this way, as opposed to what I had been fed in school, and I know my parents were fed in school as well, which was that the Wampanoags were happy to greet these pilgrims and sit down and had a wonderful meal, and everyone was happy ever after for at least 50 years. And we know that that's clearly not the case. So thank you very much for listening to what I had to say today. And I'd be happy to hand it over to Debbie and take any questions that you guys have. Oh, Debbie, you're still muted.
Mute. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciated that talk. It was so powerful. I'm very impressed with your research. Let me see. I have some questions here. Let's see. Way up. Was Massasoit a Wampanoag? How did Wampanoag relate to other Algonquin tribes?
Oh, wow. So, yes. So when we say Massasoit in this particular context as well, I think we're referring to Usamiquin. And yes, he was Wampanoag. So my understanding is that the term Massasoit is a title, and that there was a name associated with it, but that name really got hitched to one particular person. And so yes, he was Wampanoag. I don't know a ton around those relations that were going on with other tribes that spoke Algonquin as well. I do know that there was some friction with the Narragansetts around 1619. in 1620. But beyond that, I don't have a lot of details on the relations with the other Algonquin-speaking tribes.
Okay, next question. Thank you for your time today. I was recently looking into some of the history of the Thanksgiving holiday and found an article claiming that there were only a couple short written accounts from the Pilgrims about the Thanksgiving feast, and neither mentioned the presence of Native Americans. I'm curious whether there is evidence that the Wampanoags joined the Pilgrims for that historic feast, or is it rumor propagated through the ages to paint the Pilgrims in a more positive light?
Well, yes, there is proof of that. So it's in Mort's Relations. And so Mort is very much recounting exactly what he saw at that time. He does say that Massasoit showed up with 90 men and they feasted for 3 days. And we do believe that that feast is what came to be used to create the Thanksgiving holiday. There's no question that the Thanksgiving holiday was itself developed as a tool to really promote the American foundation and sort of the American ideal of, you know, community and this melting pot. So that was used as a tool. The myth of Thanksgiving was used as a tool after the Civil War. And those images that were created, even the images of the Pilgrims with the buckle and the black hat, and I mean that's all completely inaccurate. But at that particular time, they felt as though that was a nice look for Pilgrims. Obviously, the attire as well that had been put out there for my people was also extremely inaccurate as well. And it was just fabricated for the use of bringing the country together.
Okay, next question, and you have many thank yous from people here. Was the disease no longer infectious when the people returned?
When the people returned, well, I would say that and I'm assuming we're talking about that period 1616 to 1619 with the Great Dying. I don't think that at that point, I think at that point Europeans probably had some immunity towards it, but for the Wampanoag people, we were virgin, you know, hosts to it. It was completely new, and we had no immunity, and it just ripped through. It very likely could have been smallpox or something like that, but we did not have the immunity for it, and it just ripped through very quickly and was very devastating. It was a very dark time in the history of my people.
Okay, next question. Are there any verbal history stories that have been passed down through the generations of Wampanoag and documented?
Not that I know of. There very well could be, but I don't have any of those that I've heard.
Okay, any recommendations for books or resources that we could use to teach our kids the real history?
Oh yeah, you know, there are some really good stuff out there. Younger kids, we've recently done some work with a company, Brain Pop, and they do this cartoon series. And it's I want to say they're in like 30 or 35% of the schools right now in the United States as well. And I know my kid here in Mashpee, he's 8 years old, so he's in 3rd grade. They use this tool, Brain Pop, and so they got to see some of the work that we've done with them. We did one specifically on Thanksgiving, and so if you go online and Google Brain Pop Thanksgiving, it'll pull this cute little cartoon up, but it does a very good job of relating what is a very complex and difficult history to tell in a good way for kids to digest it and take something away from it. So there's those pieces there. We've also done a lot of work on curriculum development, but those are sort of specific to schools that are out there. There are a lot of good books as well. I can't necessarily rattle any off the top of my head, but I would definitely suggest, you know, taking a look and Googling to find them. Primary source, anything that's really based on those primary source documents and, accounts from the 17th century, those I think tend to be very helpful.
Next question. I'd love to hear what happened after the meal, maybe another meeting.
Yeah, gosh, that's a long one. I think what happened, after the meal were applied very, very quickly. They began to acquire land and take land at a rate that was no longer probably acceptable for the Wampanoags and our people to be able to sustain ourselves in the way that we hunted, fished, lived. And not only that, the imposition of religion was being forced sort of on us as well. So, often there's talk of this 50 years of peace after the Pilgrim's arrival, but I don't really think it was peace in the sense that we'd like to think. I think it was peace in that there place at that moment, and it was being forced upon our leaders were to a time as well, and more closely aligned with as opposed to what the Pilgrims had arrived with, which were they were still answering to the king. So those things occurred very quickly. And then obviously, once things had gotten bad enough, the King Philip's War broke out, and that did not end well for my people. It was really the beginning of the end, and it's a hard thing for a Native American to have to research, but it's important to share it because the truth and history matters if we want to continue to move forward as a people and start to move past the stereotypes that had been created, and be more open to the differences that our cultures and our traditions have, as opposed to trying to force some sort of, again, I use the term melting pot, where everyone sort of, they should sort of glob together and nobody has any unique characteristics. Our culture is very unique, and it's very important to our way of living. So retaining it is key. So yeah.
And next question: given the misuse of the Thanksgiving holiday by European Americans, how do you feel about Americans celebrating Thanksgiving as a holiday today?
That is such a great question. So one of the things that's kind of funny is that we tend to think that the Pilgrims and 1621 invented Thanksgiving, that there wasn't one prior to that, and there was. For my people, we had 4 Thanksgivings throughout the year. We had a Thanksgiving when the first fruits came in, the strawberry. We had a Thanksgiving when the herring were running, because then there was, if you've ever seen herring run through the herring run, that's just tons of food that's very easy to collect. We had another one when the corn was harvested as well, and we had one in the winter when we were hunting. The meat was there. So we had 4 of them. When I talked with some of our counterparts in Lieden, they talk about the fact that they would have a Thanksgiving feast in the fall. And the same thing on the UK side as well. They talk about Thanksgiving feasts that they have. A Thanksgiving feast to me is a great thing. Having a moment where we come together, where we share the bounties that we have. We take a moment to reflect on all that's been given to us over the past couple months or year, is a great time. And having a couple of days that are carved out that you have nothing else to do other than be with your family is a very, very, very good thing. So I don't want to get rid of the Thanksgiving holiday. What I'd like to do is educate people so that when they do sit down and enjoy that meal, they can start to maybe give thanks for other things, or at least they acknowledge that, the foundation of this country did have a dark period for the indigenous people that were here prior to that. And the other thing I would say is try and find time to have more than one Thanksgiving throughout. So I say have more Thanksgivings.
Okay, another question. Can you talk more about your video productions? Who writes and directs them? And are they shown in schools?
They have been shown in some schools. A larger exhibit. The actual production of it is something that we do here. So we have a production company. And so we do all of the writing. We do all of the directing. We do everything from start to end. And we think it's important to the authenticity of the pieces that we do, specifically for any piece that is around the early European Native American interactions. Our unique goal in this is to try and share it from the perspective and the voice of the Wampanoag people. And so to accomplish that, having it directed, written, starred by real Wampanoag people allows us to achieve that. And I think had we approached it in any other way, we would not have been able to do that. We do have some wonderfully talented videographers that we've used that are not Wampanoag, but all of the people that you see in the videos that are portraying their Wampanoag, those are real Wampanoags, and they're trying to put themselves in the place of their ancestors. We're trying to provide balance. There's been, from the European perspective, for a very long time. And so now we're finally getting out there and giving it from the perspective of the Wampanoags and the voice of Wampanoags, and giving our tribe a voice that they can look to, and it provides that balance. So now between those two, I think if you watch both perspectives, you start to see the truth. And one of the other things that's really important to point out is, when I say see those two perspectives, I'm not talking about looking at something that was produced in 1960 that is just wildly inaccurate. Because if you look at that and you look at what we produce here, there's almost no common ground. But today, what we're seeing with the 400th commemoration of the Mayflower arrival, we're seeing the organizations involved with that. We're seeing the museums that are working on exhibits. We're seeing the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. All of them, Lieden 400, they've all sat down with us, and we all agree on the core facts of the history and say, yes, these are the points that happened. Yes, these young men were taken slave. Yes, there was atrocities that occurred. Yes, there was fighting, there was death. So, yeah. So that to us is important.
Okay. Back to celebrating Thanksgiving. Is it perpetuating the oppression of the natives that took place after the European rule began? Was the meal of 390 men then taken advantage of after that?
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I don't know if there's anything written about exactly what happened to those 90 men after.
Mm. Okay. Here's a newly published book, This Land is Their Land. Someone else mentioned it, by David Silverman. Are you familiar with that one?
I'm familiar with it. I honestly haven't had a chance to read it, though, so I wouldn't be able to comment on it.
Back to smallpox. Later, was the smallpox still virulent? So did generations of Wampanoag suffer from the illness?
Well, we're guessing that it might have been smallpox. It could have been something else. It's not specifically ever mentioned in great deal exactly what that plague was that went through. So that's just one assumption that we've made, but we don't know with certainty exactly what it was.
Okay. Does the Wampanoag Trading Post in Mashpee Commons have the books that you mentioned?
Oh, is that my mother that put that post in there? So my mother owns the Wampanoag Trading Post as well in the Mashpee Commons. Yes, she does have some very nice books in there, and you can also take a look, I think, online at a lot of the material that they have. But you can also just give them a call.
Here's a book that someone recommends, 1621, A New Look at Thanksgiving, by National Geographic. Is that something you're familiar with? Okay.
Nope, I am not.
Okay.
Oh, Rachel rides bikes with my son Russell, and Rachel's she's a huge fan. She's always asking about the work that we do as well. So I'm so glad that she was on. Yeah, tell Jackson we said hello. You know, that's a really. She asked if I'd prefer if things went back to the way that they were. That's such a hard question to answer, because I do like to think that prior to the European arrival, it was rather an idyllic setting here. It was an easy way of living, and there was a balance between ourselves and nature. And there's no question that our Mother Earth at this point is not doing well. We're not as a whole acting as the stewards of this land the way that we were intended to. And so there's a sickness there, and that's hard. On the other hand as well, though, I have my two beautiful young boys and my wife, who my wife is not Wampanoag. And so to make such a huge change in history would put me at a different place here today. And I very much enjoy my family and the life that we've made for ourselves and the work that we've carved out. So it's hard to wish that somehow changed. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it's a challenging question for that reason.
Okay. Tim Martin has posted a bibliography by Linda Coombs.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, Linda.
So everyone can look at that in chat if you want.
Linda she is for me. So yeah, I could listen to Linda for days. And she has put together a free Indigenous history conference with Bridgewater State University. The last sessions are this weekend. So if you go on to Bridgewater State University or Plymouth 400, you can register for free to attend those. They are unbelievably informative, and they're just packed full of everything that Linda does is a fabulous resource.
A couple more questions. It's important that the language is being revived and taught. Thank you. Did the Wampanoags have a concept of privately held land or personal property?
No, I don't think, not necessarily in the sense that the Europeans did. And I think that was a huge point of conflict. And it was bound to bubble over to the King Philip's War at some point because of that. The Europeans need to acquire and hold land the way that they do, and to just fence it off and not allow for any communal use of it was in complete opposition of the way that my ancestors had approached their land. So certainly the Wampanoags had territory, and there were boundaries, but they were not in the same sense that the Europeans created boundaries.
A couple more comments. It's very powerful to hear the word "we" used by Mr. Peters about Wampanoag history, and thank you for the truth telling. Very powerful. One more question. How did the Wampanoag manage to hold on to or keep a foothold in your traditional territories rather than being forcibly removed to Western reservations as the Cherokee were, for example?
Yeah, my understanding of that is that they came down, they did an audit of our tribe, and at that point we had set up a rather robust economic system here. So we had factories. They essentially they came down and they said to remove us from this land would be the death of our people. That we were so entrenched in the land, the local economy, that it would have been devastating. And so they opted to leave us here. What you did see then is on Cape Cod is the other towns really kind of build up around us, and they kind of came around to us last. I think my great grandfather was one of the first selectmen in town, and this was around the Great Depression, I believe. And he ran on a platform that if he had been elected, he would bring electricity down Main Street, Mashpee. Obviously, all the other towns had electricity well before that, but they just circumvented around our community.
Okay, and just one more comment from someone, and sums it up for all of us. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. We really appreciate it.